If you've been looking at the Mavic 3 Classic, Mavic 3 Pro, or the Air 3 and wondering which drone you should get, then today's video is going to help you out a lot. And we're going to jump straight into photo quality. One of the things that differentiates the Mavic 3, Mavic 3 Classic, and the Air 3 is the main 24mm camera. On the Mavic 3, you have this wonderful 20 megapixel Hasselblad 4/3 sensor camera that is just fantastic. Lots of detail, really great colors, and gives you a lot of leeway to work with. There's a lot of dynamic range. DJI says about 12.6, 12.7 stops, which is a huge amount for a drone this size. On the other hand, the Air 3 has a 24mm camera, but it's that 1/1.3 inch sensor, which means it's 12 or 48 megapixels. Now, it's a quad Bayer sensor, so it's not a true 48 megapixel sensor. It's a way that they group the pixels together in a clump of 4 to give you more dynamic range and give you some other options, but it can also be split and all of them can be read separately, so you get a 48 megapixel photo. This is a 12 megapixel photo here. This is the 48 megapixel in the same exact spot. And if you notice, I actually prefer the quality of the 12 megapixels a little bit over the 48 megapixels, just because I feel like you get a little less aberrations and fringing and just odd things that happen. But if you want a little bit more detail, the 48 megapixel does give you a little bit more detail. Now, if you have the Mavic 3 Pro, the Air 3, both have that 70mm 3x lens. Both are sporting a 12 or 48 megapixels, and to me, there's not a lot of difference between the two. It is nice to be able to punch in that little bit extra and get a little bit more compression. It definitely gives you a different way to compose a shot. But then on the Mavic 3, you also have that 166 or 162 millimeter lens, depending on which version you get. Obviously you don't get that if you're on the Classic, but the Mavic 3 166 only shoots in 12 megapixels. But that is a really great focal length if you want to get shots of stuff that you don't want to be anywhere near, or wildlife, something like that, that you don't want to take any chance of disturbing them. That lens or that camera will give you that option. And both of these drones do offer all of the panoramic, wide angle, sphere photos, 180 degree photos, vertical panos, all of that in the different cameras, which gives you a lot of options for different kinds of photos that you might want to take. And they all look really good. And there is one more difference in both of these drones for photos, and that's 360 photos. If you're going to do a lot of 360 photos, then the Air 3 is going to be a better choice because it has 60 degrees of up tilt, and so you can get an actual true 360 degree photo, where the Mavic 3 is limited to 35 degrees of up tilt, so you never actually get a true 360 degree photo. Now, it pieces in the sky and makes it look like it is, but it actually isn't, and you won't really notice until you get down around or near really tall buildings. Now, I've been working with the Mavic 3 for a long time. I've worked with the Air 3 now for quite a bit of time, and I will say, if you do a lot of photo work, or if you're a serious aerial photographer, the Mavic 3 wins hands down. That 20 megapixel main camera is just fantastic to work with. So if you're really serious about photography, I would definitely consider the Mavic 3 Classic or the Mavic 3 Pro if you have the budget for it. And then it comes down to the video performance of both of these drones. Now, the Mavic 3 definitely has a huge advantage over the Air 3, and that's that 4/3 sensor with the Hasselblad color science, which is absolutely fantastic. But it can also shoot 5.1K up to 50 frames a second, which gives you a fair amount more resolution if you want to work with it and reframe stuff in post. Also, it can shoot 4K up to 120 frames a second, where the Air 3 is limited to 100 frames a second in 4K. And while both of these drones shoot 1080p up to 200 frames a second, the Mavic 3 gives you a much higher quality because it crops in on the sensor and gives you a true readout, whereas the Air 3 bins it, and you definitely notice a big difference in the level of detail. Now, the Mavic 3 Classic only has a 24mm camera, but the Mavic 3 Pro have a 3x camera like the Air 3 does, and the Mavic 3 Pro and the original Mavic 3 have a 7x camera, about 162 to 166 millimeters, depending on which model you got. Behind me, there's some climbers on the rocks, and I want to show you the difference in the field of view between the three different cameras, both on the Air 3 and on the Mavic 3 Pro, so that you can get an idea of what you can do with the different cameras available on these drones. So here you can see the 24mm on both the Mavic 3 Pro and the Air 3. If you can find the climbers in here, you're doing really well. Then here is the 3x camera on the Air 3 and the Mavic 3, and all of these settings are as close to the same as I could possibly get them. And then here is the 166mm camera on the Mavic 3 Pro, which obviously gives you a ton more reach, definitely really compresses that background and gives you a just unbelievable parallax effect. Now the one downside of this camera and the one that was on the original Mavic 3, the 162mm on the original Mavic 3, is that neither one of them will shoot in any sort of D-Cine-like or D-Log-M. They both only shoot in normal, which is a super contrasty image, and it's a little bit difficult to work with. But when you need a shot like this, it really is tough to beat and get anything else. Now, if you're looking between the Mavic 3 Pro or the Air 3, they both have that 70mm camera, which has quickly become one of my favorite cameras to shoot with because it just gives you a little bit more lens compression. You get these really nice looking shots, and the quality coming off of it really on both of them, I mean, it's the same basically on both of them, but the quality coming off of both of them really looks nice. But I think my favorite thing is just the right amount of lens compression you get from that 3X 70mm camera. It's great if you want to jump in and get some shots of wildlife without getting too close. It's great for getting people and details on things that you wouldn't normally get that close with. And overall, the 70mm camera, I think by far, has become my favorite to shoot with, both with the Air 3 and with the Mavic 3 Pro. But a huge advantage the Mavic 3 has over the Air 3 is that main camera. It just has a lot more dynamic range. It just has a much nicer image quality to it. In fact, the only way I've been able to get that kind of close with the Mavic 3 or the Air 3 is to be able to cut the sharpness down to -2 on both cameras. And that's kind of where, especially if you're shooting in D-Log on the Mavic 3, then that's where you're gonna get the best, most quality. There's no in-camera sharpening, no noise reduction. You get just absolutely beautiful imagery to work with. But the biggest advantage that the Mavic 3 has over the Air 3 is the variable aperture. This is massive on the main camera if you're out shooting and conditions are changing rapidly, or you only maybe have a couple of ND filters. It makes a huge difference being able to adjust that aperture on the fly without having to land the drone and put a different ND filter on, or maybe boost the ISO way up because all of a sudden clouds moved over in front of the sun and you're in shadow now. Now that's not to say that the Air 3 doesn't stand up or hold up. It definitely puts out a really nice image. The D-Log-M is really nice to work with. You can get it to a lot of places. Because it's 10-bit, you can color grade it pretty heavily and it doesn't quite fall apart as early as just a normal color profile or an 8-bit color profile would for sure. And because you get the 24mm or the 70mm camera, you do get a lot of options for how you want to compose a shot. And the image looks really nice coming out of it. But then we come to low light performance. Both of these drones really do amazingly well in low light. And I recently had a work trip to Las Vegas where we actually had low light, so I was able to shoot some there. And I shot as close as I could to the same thing with both of these drones in night mode. So you can see here, the quality of both of them, very good. Produces some great imagery in some pretty dang dark environments. But there is a difference here that I noticed. One, the Mavic 3 only has night mode on the main camera. You don't get it on the other cameras, where the Air 3, you can get night mode on both cameras. So that definitely gives you more options for how to compose a shot. And because the Air 3 has the 1.7 aperture, it actually matches up and holds up to the larger sensor of the Mavic 3. It's pretty impressive how well it does with that. That being said, I haven't tried to film the Aurora or the Northern Lights with the Air 3 yet. But the Mavic 3 I have, and it did a pretty good job. It was pretty amazing how much it was able to capture, considering the size of this drone and the elements that it was battling at the time and the fact that it was almost completely dark. So for low light, both of these drones do perform very well because of the night mode setting that DJI has started to include in their drones, which I am really thankful for. It has really good noise reduction overall and does a great job getting you some very, very low light shots. So the Mavic 3, if you want the best image quality out of a small package like this, the Mavic 3 Classic or the Mavic 3 Pro is going to be the way to go. Now, if you're okay with not getting some of those little extra features, then the Air 3 is a really solid drone, will give you fantastic image quality, but if budget is a concern, this is still a really solid drone. The Air 3 can punch well above its weight class and well above its price in image quality overall, both in photo and video modes. Now that we've covered image quality in photo and video modes, it's time to dive in some of the other things that make these drones similar and the things that separate them when it comes to obstacle avoidance, active track, waypoints, and things like that. Active track is a great feature and I love it, but it is limited in what you can do with it. In other words, it just tracks a subject from the front or from the side or from the rear, and both of these drones do a great job with active track, tracking from pretty much any direction, especially because they both have 360 obstacle avoidance. One way to test tracking is to see what happens when the subject gets lost behind an object. And here the Air 3 was a massive winner, clearly won over the Mavic 3. I tried to track myself behind this rock several times with the Mavic 3 and behind a couple other things, and every single time the Mavic 3 would lose me and stop tracking. And one time it almost ran me over when it was trying to reacquire me, where the Air 3 stayed really solid and just kept tracking right on through and got right back on subject, acquiring the subject once I came out the other side every single time. So the Air 3 active tracking, if that's something you're going to do, the Air 3 is considerably better. But there are times when you want to get shots that you just can't get with active track, but you also don't want to have to personally fly the drone exactly every single time, especially if you film yourself like I do a lot. And one of the best features that both of these drones have is Waypoints, which enables you to get really cool shots like this. Now, I did a whole video on why Waypoints are better than active track in some cases, at least for the Mavic 3, and you can watch that here. But there are a lot of cases where you want to do a very specific move with your drone that you can't do without flying it yourself. But with Waypoints, you can pre-program that entire move in and the drone will repeat it as many times as you need it to, which is how I've been able to get shots like this. Now, when it comes to speed and flight mechanics, there's not as much difference between these two drones as you might think. Both of them top out at about 47-ish miles an hour, but the Air 3 does ascend a bit faster at about 18 miles an hour compared to 13 to 14 miles an hour on the Mavic 3. And the Air 3 descends at 22 miles an hour, where the Mavic 3 is hard limited to about 14-ish miles an hour for descent speed. So it's about 30% faster descent speed, about 20% faster ascent speed, so you can get places a lot faster if you're going up in places like this in the mountains or trying to get down really quickly as well. And of course, then we come to flight time. Now, the Mavic 3 is rated at 43 minutes, if I remember correctly. Realistically, you're gonna be like at 33 to 36 minutes maybe, where the Air 3 is rated to 46 or 47 minutes. And honestly, I've been getting 38 to 39 minutes, depending on how you're flying. If I'm sport mode, stuff like that, fighting heavy wind, it's not gonna fly as long, but the Air 3 clearly wins on flight time. And overall, if you're gonna be doing stuff like I'm doing today, out hiking in the wilderness, and you wanna condense your load as much as possible, while they don't seem that much different size-wise, there definitely is a weight difference, and when you add a couple of batteries, that weight difference starts adding up quickly. And this is also where things take a little bit of a different turn depending on where you live in the world. For the US, it's not such a big deal, but if you live in the European Union, the Mavic 3 is over 900 grams, which means it doesn't get the C1 label where the Air 3 does. So you're able to fly this and use this in a lot less restrictive ways than you would the Mavic 3. Now, I'm not going to say that I'm an expert on any of the European Union regulations on drone weights and sizes and how close and how far away you have to be from people and buildings, stuff like that. But you need to be aware that the Mavic 3 Pro, at least, is over that 900 gram limit, and it will be much more restrictive on where you can fly, whereas the Air 3 is a lot more lenient because of that C1 label and because of the DB rating on it. You can be much closer to people and buildings than the Mavic Pro. Now, the Mavic Classic, I believe, fits in that C1 label, so if that's something you're to go with, then you should be fine. And then we come to what is probably going to be most people's determining factor, and that's budget. The Air 3 starts at $1,099 US dollars, at least at the time of this recording, and then goes up to about $1,550. If you're going to get the Fly More combo, where the Mavic Classic, the cheapest version of the Mavic 3 series, starts at about $1,500 or $1,600 and then goes up to $1,700. But if you want to get extra batteries, that's going to run you well into the $2,000 US dollar range. But if you're going to get the Mavic 3 Pro, then you're going to start at $2,199 or about $2,200 and go from there all the way up to the basically $5,000 Mavic 3 Cine range. But I'm really curious to know what you think. Are you going to upgrade or change to the Air 3 if you already own a Mavic 3, or is the Mavic 3 a better fit for you? Let me know in the comments below. For me, they're both fantastic drones. I'll be keeping both because the Mavic 3 fits for my professional work when I'm needing ProRes or I'm needing that higher quality image that's a little bit easier to color grade for colorists that I hand it off to on TV shows and stuff like that. But for me, doing the stuff that I do here, in this area, hiking, backpacking, a lot of times the things I do with helicopters, the Air 3 is going to be it because of that weight savings, the size savings, and it just does a great job, and it pretty much captures everything I need in just that little bit smaller and lighter of a package. But if you want to see how I set my drones up and the settings, you're going to want to click or tap right there. I will see you over there. As always, if you have questions or if I didn't answer a certain question in this video, then join me on my live stream, which happens Wednesdays at 4 p.m. Alaska time, 8 p.m. Eastern, where we can have more of a conversation and maybe answer questions I didn't get to in this video. I'll see you again soon in the next video. Cheers.